There are thousands of Israelis who've turned out for this protest, blocking off an entire street. We've got Hostage Square over here, and there is no coincidence that the IDF headquarters is just over on this side of the road. The idea behind these thousands of Israelis showing up tonight is that they want to make their voice heard to a government they believe aren't listening to them.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. The war in Gaza rages on as the Israeli government refines its plans to take over Gaza City. In response, massive protests have erupted across Israel. But given Benjamin Netanyahu's deep anti-democratic impulses, it's anyone's guess how this will play out. I wanted to get an expert's perspective on what is happening and on America's role, in particular, the importance of Donald Trump's relationship with Netanyahu. I asked the founder and president of J Street, Jeremy Ben-Ami, to join me. He's just returned from Israel. Here's our conversation. Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. My guest today is Jeremy Ben-Ami, the founder and president of J Street, an advocacy organization that promotes peace in the Middle East and has stood up to all forms of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that undermine a future in which peace is possible. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
I understand you just came back from a trip to that part of the world. It is tough times, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. We have this horrific proposal to have Israeli forces occupy Gaza on what seems like a permanent basis. What did you see while you were over there?
Yeah, so we run these educational trips that take policymakers and members of Congress and their staff to see the conflict firsthand. I call it a graduate level seminar in the conflict because we don't do the touristy itinerary that groups like AIPAC take members of Congress to see. And I know Speaker Johnson was there last week on a mission sponsored by an American evangelical group, and they were mostly having nice dinners in the settlements with the prime minister. So we do a completely different type of trip, and we really explore all the issues that are at the core of the conflict in depth. So we went to the city of Hebron, where three major little settlement enclaves with 600 settlers have emptied out tens of thousands of people from the center of the major Palestinian city in the West Bank. We visited one of the small Bedouin villages, which has been the victim of settler violence, and the cameraman for the Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land was killed just last week in that exact spot. And we visited the mourning tent, and we saw the spot where he was killed. We visited the Temple Mount, where one of the Israeli ministers is trying to lead Jewish prayer and spark like a religious war. These are the kinds of things that we look at, and it's pretty disturbing, obviously. And that doesn't even touch on Gaza. We visited the Gaza border, visited some of the communities devastated by October 7th, but also talked by Zoom with a Palestinian aid worker who's been in Gaza and seeing firsthand what he's been experiencing there. So it was a very, very tough trip, but I think really important.
I've talked to a few Israelis and members of the opposition who say that the Netanyahu that they are dealing with today is not the same Netanyahu of a few years ago, much less 10 years ago. He has learned a few things from Trump, a lot from Trump, and it has ushered in a sea change in Israeli politics, the politics of division and separating people in ways that they weren't before in Israeli society. I imagine you're mostly talking to opposition figures, but how do you understand the Netanyahu that they are dealing with today?
Well, I think there's two things I would say. One is that he's thrown in his lot ideologically with the most extreme people in the Israeli political ecosystem. I mean, it is. These are folks that are beyond the pale. They follow in the footsteps of Jewish terrorists like Meir Kahane and the Jewish Defense League that have been banned in Israeli history from politics and were banned from the Knesset. And the ideological heirs of Meir Kahane are now running ministries in the Netanyahu government. And Netanyahu is personally responsible for ensuring their essential role he had other options for how he could have formed a government. He had other options for how he could have maintained his power. But this is the way that he chose to go. So it's not just that he's learned from Trump tactically and how to message and how to divide people. That's a whole, and how to use the communications of 2025. That's a whole piece of it that's separate from the ideological. Netanyahu has just moved way to the right, and it's not just way to the right; it's to an extreme fringe of the right. And this is, to my mind, it's beyond the pale of anything that we've seen in the U.S.-Israel relationship before.
And what is the relationship now, as you see it, between Trump and Netanyahu?
Well, I think that, interestingly enough, there are times when Trump apparently is losing his temper at Netanyahu, right, and losing his patience with him. I think around the question of is there or is there not famine and starvation, Bibi trying to deny to President Trump that there is any such thing as the starvation. Apparently, according to reports, Trump was screaming at him on the phone about, I've seen the pictures that, you've got to do something about this. There has to be food for people. So I do think that there's aspects of the Trump-Netanyahu relationship that are tense, and it's been reported on even from the first term. It's not as much of a, twins separated at birth relationship as some people portray it. They both have very, very ethno-nationalist, racist, anti-democratic approaches to politics, but it doesn't mean that they're birds of a feather. I do think there's things to be exploited there. There are differences and there are gaps there that could lead to Trump deciding he's had it with Netanyahu and to press him to stop in Gaza and to stop with some of the policies that he's about to implement.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who's been following and supporting this show and this channel. None of it happens without you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my Substack page, I'd really appreciate the follow. It's a great way to make sure you never miss an episode. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks, every dollar goes back into the show. Just search for The Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack or click the link below. Thanks. Let's switch to domestic politics because that has been the main lever that J Street has applied. And you have long been critical of Trump's cynical manipulation of the conflict and of the Jewish community here in the U.S. And that comes up across a host of issues beyond Gaza and Israel. You've spoken out about immigration policies and things like that. Where's J Street most active right now?
Right. Well, I think the concern that so many of us have is the way that this administration, Trump and the Republican Party generally, are weaponizing the issue of anti-Semitism. There is a very, very serious problem, and there always has been, and unfortunately there likely always will be, a problem with anti-Semitism in this country and abroad. It is rising right now, and it's really important to fight it. But the fight against anti-Semitism shouldn't be weaponized for other purposes. And what you see from the Trump administration and from the Heritage Foundation and something called Project Esther across a lot of the agenda being pursued by the House of Representatives under Mike Johnson through its various committee investigations, they are trying to use the anti-Semitism charge to pursue their agenda for taking down higher education, for opposing immigration, for denying visas to Muslim students, for undercutting the right of free speech, for circumscribing due process rights of people who are charged with just simply having opinions that the Trump administration doesn't like. So all of these things are being done in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. And I can say on behalf of the majority of the American Jewish community, these are fundamental pillars of American Jewish life. Higher education, immigration, protection for minorities. Those are things that are key to Jewish life in this country over the last century. And to see them being undercut by this administration with the excuse that we're fighting anti-Semitism is really very disturbing and counter to all of our interests and values.
Every so often, the mask slips, though. There was an interview with the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, recently after the Columbia settlement, in which she let it slip that now Columbia was going to have to, I'll have to look up the clip, but basically follow pro-Trump guidelines. She made no mention of anti-Semitism whatsoever. You have this content monitor now overseeing CBS. They say it's about anti-Semitism when they go after these universities, but it is really about controlling thought.
Right. And this is how democracies are undermined, right? This is a playbook that we see around the world. And whether it's in education or it's in the media or law firms and now corporations, I mean, there's a whole series of institutions within society that autocratic regimes try to inject their agenda and their ideology and to use the levers of power to impose that. And anti-Semitism is being used by the administration as part of that larger agenda. It's not the only tool in their toolkit, but it's certainly one of the key instruments because they win over a group of people that are afraid to be arguing against what's being done, because if you argue against it, it sounds like you're in favor of anti-Semitism. So it's a very useful tool, but the American Jewish community should not be useful tools for an effort to take apart American democracy.
The irony is that some of the most rabid anti-Semites are allies of Donald Trump. I mean, he's the only president who hosted a literal neo-Nazi at his home, Nick Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago. Surely that has to raise alarm bells among those who otherwise would see him as a friend of the American Jewish community.
Right. You know, there's a long history here, right, of it starts with Charlottesville and fine people on both sides as people are marching with tiki torches and shouting, "Jews shall not replace us." There's a through line through January 6th and through the Proud Boys and through some of these other right-wing militias where anti-Semitism is a key part of the overall white nationalist agenda. And it is really important to remind people of this, but what has unfortunately happened within the American Jewish community is that some of the institutions of the American Jewish community get more upset by left of center criticism of what the government of Israel is doing than they do by the actual right-wing anti-Semites that are standing up and saying they're pro-Israel. So you have a very strange dynamic where some of these folks who are, truly at their core anti-Semitic are somehow seen as pro-Israel allies, and people who have long histories of supporting Israel but don't like Benjamin Netanyahu are now being called anti-Semites. And so the world is kind of turned on its head. And I think part of it is an agenda from Donald Trump and the right. And they laid it all out, the Heritage Foundation, in this Project Esther document that accompanied Project 2025. But part of it is also just a complete misfire in the American Jewish community about how it is reading the tea leaves about what really truly constitutes anti-Semitism.
Well, thanks so much for your advocacy. We'll keep tracking. It's been great having you on. Let's check in again soon.
Yeah, appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me.